Hello, everyone. I'm here again with Jan Swafford, composer and writer. One of my favorite people to have in my new podcast. Second appearance so far. So I wanted to talk to Jan today about something completely, well, not completely different. It's still about music. It's still about Beethoven. It's still about classical music. But I wanted to talk about an article he wrote. He titled the article "The Wrangled Politics of Art." So, John, what's this article about? I read it. I agree with a lot of the things you're saying in this. You're writing in this article. I think it's one of the most important things we should be talking about. Politics in the arts. I think it has gotten worse and worse with time. And I don't know where we are right now, but things are still pretty bad. And you go over a lot of things here that I think are very important for people to understand and for musicians to understand. And that's how politics can affect the arts. I think for the worst. I mean, I don't know. What's your you start the article by quoting Heather McDonald article in City Journal. The article is "Classical Music Suicide Pact." So you want to start with that, and we'll take it
Well,
from there.
up just a little bit, and then I'll come back to her. She's a very much person of the right, writing about the arts, and I don't agree with everything she said, but in a way, she was the stimulus for my article. That and a book by a friend of mine, composer Daniel Asia, who wrote a book that involves a lot of these issues. And I will say, I also want to say this. I wrote this article about, I don't know, drafted it maybe a year and a half ago. So the artistic situation has changed for the worse in a way since this article. And the question is, how much does the woke idea approach to art, which is a lot of what I'm talking about essentially, has that had to go underground? And what do you think? I don't really know. Has wokeness in the arts gone somewhat underground because of the current administration? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, um, I think in many ways has gone on the ground. In many ways, I feel that administrations in different institutions have doubled down, and we see a lot of backlash to the new measures of this administration. Heather McDonald calls this article "Classical Music's Suicide Pact," and I wanted to talk about some of the things that she criticizes in this article, and that you also talk about in your article. And I wanted to start with her perspective on this, which is that administrations and DEI in institutions all over the classical music world have adopted these policies to include or to have a more diverse group of people representing the arts. And
And what
you,
she's saying is at the expense of quality in the arts much of the time, is what she's
right,
saying.
right. But she starts I mean, you start your article by talking about how the New York Times, New York Philharmonic, basically all of the organizations, they adopted these policies, and I think to me the most troublesome thing is the fact that we continue to call a classical music racist, sort of something we inherited from a white supremacist society. At some point, you in your article, you even talk about uh, uh, the writings of Susan McClary, the famous musicologist, who says that Beethoven's music is not only an act of white supremacy, but sort of like an act of
Rape
of rape,
is the word.
rape,
Rape.
especially on the Ninth Symphony, the B flat chord
Well, she's
that
talking about one chord in the Ninth
talking
Symphony.
about one chord. So yeah, I mean, like, this is something that troubles me. But I want to start with your article
Troubles
and
me too.
your response to Heather's article, and you agree with certain things she says, and you disagree with a lot of things she says.
So, and the specific things that Heather McDonald is talking about are the kind of things, and we were all seeing these. They were basically, people were saying we have to have more diversity in orchestras now. And I remember one New York Times critic said we should end blind auditions and orchestra auditions, which is basically saying that that's a way to get more Black people and more women maybe in orchestras. Women don't need the help in orchestras, I don't think, right now. And my response to that is, are we going to let people in orchestras based to some degree on the color of their skin? So what about letting, tight ends on the Patriots based on the color of their skin? To me, one makes about as much sense as the other. And what my critique of all this is not the desire to have more diversity in orchestras and in classical music in general. And this is quite aside from the academic things about classical music being, an act of rape, or classical music being hegemonic and classical music being Eurocentric and white. And, I just don't have much to say about any of that. Given that this is the music that you and I, for example, have devoted our lives to. And the idea that people should listen to music for what it tells them about the hegemonic, aspect of classical music is nuts. I read something recently about Beethoven, that everything he did was a matter of ego and solipsism, and as if we should listen to Beethoven to hear what it tells us about Beethoven's ego and solipsism. That's not why we listen to music. So, and my critique of this was not that we desire more diversity and representation in classical music. I think most people do these days. It certainly wasn't the case. I mean, when was it? I think it was the 60s when the first woman was allowed in the Boston Symphony. That was Dorio Anthony Dwyer, the flute player. And when I was studying and working on the Brahms in the 90s in Vienna, women were not allowed in the Vienna Philharmonic. I mean, these are terrible things. So everybody, I think most people agree about things like this. But part of the reason I wrote the article is to say it's much, much more complicated than that. It's much more complicated than say, okay, we have open orchestra auditions and not behind a screen, and that will help solve the problem. That's not going to solve the problem. Declaring that we must have more women, more minorities, more diversity in these things, declaring that is in itself not going to solve the problem. Working in that direction will, but it's going to not be easy. Here's the thing. You and I know a lot of this already. Let me by the way, I've had an old line that for a long time that says, when politicians get interested in the arts, artists better run. I remind people that Stalin was really interested in the arts. He was very much a fan of the arts. That's why he killed so many artists. And I also remember, who was it in Congress who said that artists were a bunch of homosexuals and leftists and commies and, this sort of thing. But let's take a single example. And to say that there is no racism in the arts, or that there is, the racism in the arts has historically been there. It's probably less so now than at any time in the past. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, infinitely less.
And yes. I mean, I have an example. I mean, what I do in the article start with a series of little stories of various directions. And one of the stories is, I was at a benefit concert once for New England Conservatory. And at the end, this drunken woman in a mink coat staggered up and sat down at our table. And she said, and I quote exactly, this was about 25 years ago. She said, We don't like that new conductor of the Philharmonic. My brother-in-law is on the board. He's a black man, and black men smell bad. We're going to get rid of him, unquote. And then she got up and tottered off. So, of course, racism existed, and I'm sure it still exists to some degree. And I think prejudice against women conductors still exists, because I've had musicians complain to me about women conductors in the last few years. So it's not to say that there's no problem. Of course there is. But I do think, we agree, the racism and sexism in classical music is far, far less than it ever used to be. And people who were getting away with murder in terms of abuse in the past don't necessarily get away with it anymore. The Me Too movement has overturned a lot of rocks. But let's go back. We want more black people in orchestras. We want more black people in classical music. Well, how do you do that? You don't do it by taking away the screens when people try out. You don't do it by saying we will have more black people come hell or high water in our conservatory. The trouble is this: look at black history in the country. Sports are dominated, most sports, by black people. Why is that? It's because sports are a very important thing in black culture. And that means that more kids go into it, and more kids are passionate about it, and more kids work hard at it, black kids. Do black basketball players have some physical advantages? I think possibly they do, but there are more black basketball players because there are more black people playing basketball, because black basketball is a big presence in black culture. There are a lot of black dancers because dance has a certain presence in black culture. The great American invention of jazz was created by black musicians because music had a big place in black culture. So to start with, until classical music has a place in black culture, you are not going to have massive numbers of kids going into it. Is all this making sense so far?
Well, yes, yeah. I wanted to read something you wrote here in your article. You wrote, "I'll propose a principle here: the significance of an endeavor within a culture or subculture translates directly into its significance in a profession." So I think
Yes.
this is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Basically, how present is classical music in the life of these communities. And I have something to say about that, which uh, uh, which illustrates a little bit of what you're talking about. I worked for 3 years. I had a program in the Upper West Side in New York City at the George Washington Educational Campus in Washington Heights. And I was basically opening there a music program to bring orchestral music, to introduce students to, all sorts of music, but also to develop a program so that the students could sing and dance accompanied by the music. So basically, the idea was to develop this program by bringing to the school a symphony orchestra. I brought an orchestra of about 20 to 25 musicians. We got a grant from Yale University at the time to develop this program, and there was this program was for 5 high schools, about 5,000 kids, and many of them had never seen a violin before. They didn't know who Beethoven was. They didn't know who Mozart was. They didn't know anything about classical music whatsoever. So to me, the fact that the teachers at this and the professors and the tenured professors at these institutions, conservatories, that are supposed to be the hubs where classical music and classical musicians learn about their craft and learn to love beauty and classical music and tradition, the fact that they are calling this music, races and all sorts of what is it that's that the yeah, Mozart is racist. This is from the Heather McDonald article. She writes that the academic critical forums um, basically are saying that Mozart is racist, Western music theory is racist, orchestras are racist, and this is all happening within our little cocoon, our little bubble. And
Meanwhile, they're not saying pop music is racist, but
right,
sexist.
when there is a lot of that in pop music as well,
Yeah.
probably even more so. But anyways, we are destroying something that basically is completely absent in the life of communities that are underserved. And I can talk for these 5,000 kids that I was serving in the Upper West Side of New York. None of them had heard, with the exception of one or two, a symphonic concert. Had gone to the symphony, or none of them have heard about Beethoven or any other
What you're
music.
saying is exactly what I'm saying, is that it has to start in the schools. And it has to start with introducing kids in schools to classical music. When I was a kid in Chattanooga, Tennessee, every year the Chattanooga Symphony would take the entire thousands of kids in the big auditorium and play a concert for them. And I think that changed my life, and it probably changed a certain amount of lives. But though, of course, school music programs, bands, and orchestras did too. You have to take it into the community and create a passion within the community that will then generate students who want to go into music. This is the first part of the process, and it starts as early as possible and in terms of Black culture in America, until Western classical music has a place in that culture and is respected in that culture, not that much will happen. Okay, some students will go into it and they will work hard and they will do great, but not that many. But this is only the beginning. This is the problem, because this doesn't solve anything yet. So let's follow through. Let's say more Black students start studying music, and there are good community programs, and they're not only players going into the communities and playing, but there are people who are teaching in the Black community and rearing musicians, and there is more money for orchestras and bands in schools, so there's more of that. I grew up in Chattanooga, where every school had an orchestra, every school had a band. There was a symphony orchestra in town that played for students, and there was just a lot of music around all the time. And it wasn't just pop music. Okay, now let's follow the chain a little bit. As to the idea that Western classical music is all racist and sexist and hegemonic, what are you going to do? I mean, so is Shakespeare, so is Euripides, so is, if you want to go that route, which is mostly academic, you just end up wiping away a fantastic amount of tradition.
Jan, also,
And people who devoted their lives to this music as well.
And it has no place in reality. These things have no place in reality. The reality is that when I play a Mozart piano concerto that we did for these kids in this Upper West Side community, they were mesmerized by it. They loved it. Well, you know how many kids came and said, "Well, never heard anything so beautiful." Maestro, I never heard anything so beautiful. So then should I have said after that, well, what you heard was the work of a racist, and you shouldn't love it.
Yeah, I know.
So
a lot of academia. When I was teaching writing at Tufts, there was that attitude was rampant. It was teaching people to hate literature, and also teaching people to feel superior to it. What was in deconstruction called the imperial reader. The reader is superior to the writer, and the function of the reader is to figure out how racist and sexist the writer is, and so forth and so on. And it really should be about pleasure and about joy and about enlightenment and about being exalted. And I can read literature that is, has racist elements, and I don't care. It doesn't matter. That's not why I read it. Um, anyway, I want to go back to this chain. You start in schools, you begin to do what you did and have students say, my God, this is beautiful. I've never heard anything like this before, which is what it's supposed to be about. So some of them start studying music, and maybe a community music school appears, and they're good teachers, and they form a little orchestra. And students start getting interested, and then they go into high school, and they're more sophisticated. And there's a music program in the high school, and they can sing and they can play, a certain amount of classical music, a certain amount of other things too. And the important thing is that it's not the pop music that they hear all day, every day. It's something else. And it gives them aspirations. So they go to college and they want to study music now. This is where it starts to get complicated. And I think you know what I'm going to say. Because you're passionate about music and go to college to study music doesn't mean you're going to make a career as a musician. It's very unlikely. It's a very similar situation to all the kids in black schools all over the country who want to play in the NBA or want to play in the professional football. And a lot of them are very good, and a lot of them are very passionate, and sometimes they go to high school and they're stars, and they go to college and they're stars, and then they're done.
Yeah, you really go into detail about that in your article. I love that. I love that part because you said, okay, well, let's say that, okay, great. We have opened, the conservatories and the classical music world to all these black kids, and that are going to be studying music, and they're going to be studying for free, and that's the way it should be. But then what are we promising them? Because most of the people that we know, white people, black people, Latin people from all the musicians that we know in our career, perhaps 1 or 2% of those musicians are having or making a decent living from this career of classical music, and that's why it's called a vocation, and it's not a job. I mean, you talk about the fact that you didn't make a decent living and achieve middle class status until your 70s. I thought that was
to the degree that we're creating music lovers in schools who study music and remain music lovers, that's great. There are a lot of these people playing in community orchestras all over the world, all over the country, and that's great. But the idea of a profession is going to be, here's one of my favorite stories from violinist Mark Kaplan. He was traveling with a trio in Italy. The story, maybe I told it before.
you wrote it. You wrote it in your article. Is it right
Okay.
here?
Yeah. They were on a 10-week tour with a trio in Italy in the middle of summer. And they got to the small town, and the taxi delivered them to the wrong train station. And they couldn't find another taxi. So they had to walk across town in blazing sun in the middle of summer with 10 weeks of baggage to get to the other train station. In the middle of it, one of them said, people are practicing 8 hours a day at Juilliard to do this. And somebody else said, yeah, and most of them will never make
it. I mean, that's such a great story because it's supposed to be funny and sarcastic, but it's not really. It's the truth. Most classical musicians will not.
These black students come into school, they work hard, they're as good as the people around them, if not better, and women, of course, too. When I taught at Boston Conservatory, half my students were from Japan and Korea and Mongolia. I had a Mongolian violinist who was really terrific. And then they get out and they can't find a job. It's in the vast majority of them. So they end up in frustration. And here's another thing. If you're a black person and you go for an audition and you didn't get it, you're probably going to think it's racism. I don't think there's any answer to that. And even though it probably isn't most of the time, sometimes it may be. But that's what you're going to think. And I don't know what to do about that. But here's another thing that I'm very aware of. Schools are desperate to get more minority students. Music schools. I know they are. We were. And here's another thing in composers. When I was at Boston Conservatory, at one point, there were of the 5 composers, 3 of them were women. They and all of us were desperate to get more women composers in the program, and we ended up with very few. Why? There weren't nearly as many women applying in composition, and in performance there were more women than men applying, and in the school, but in composition we had to struggle to get anybody. And we knew that if a really good candidate came to Boston Conservatory, if she was really good, we weren't going to get her because all the music schools were desperate to get more women in their program. And they were doing everything they could to do that. And will that produce more women composers? Absolutely. But there's still a vast minority, at last I know, at least, of the people applying in the first place. I mean, one might joke about it was always that women had more sense than to go into something as stupid as writing music. But
No, the thing goes for these minorities. I mean, you come, this is, I'm part of that minority. I came from Cuba, and my parents, when my parents got here, they had to work in factories, and even though they were math professors at the universities in Cuba, because it's the way you start here when you come with nothing but the clothes you're wearing, and how do you tell people that are coming from this kind of experience, hey, work hard, practice 8 to 10 hours a day to get into a conservatory, pay 40, 50,000, get loans to pay 40, $50,000, and that's minimum a year to study this craft, and then after you finish, basically there's zero chance of you making it into this career.
It's not zero, but it's very low.
Right. But I mean, I'm exaggerating to make my point. There is very little chance of you, first of all, making a career enough to even pay back the money that you borrowed. And then you're coming from these communities where you're struggling your whole life to get ahead. Your parents are struggling. So there's no incentive really from us or from anybody to tell these communities, like, get into a life that is going to become even harder, as you get older for you.
I mean, if you go to law school and end up with a huge debt, that's one thing, because you're going to make
or medical school, yes,
or medical school. Here's what there was another thing about. So what we're getting at is that the desire to get more women, minorities, whoever it is, into classical music is absolutely worthwhile, but the process is much more complicated, and in some cases, in a way, tragic than it is, because classical music is such an incredible skill that you have to learn, and you have to learn not only the physical skill, but you have to learn the judgment and the taste and the knowledge and the background. Here's another thing, though, and now I'm going to go back to current kind of politically correct attitudes. There was, I don't know if it still is, probably some. Another attitude that was around in critical and academic circles were that there's really no such thing as talent. It just depends on how much you love what you're doing and how hard you work. And if you put in your 10,000 hours, you will be great. That's absolute nonsense. Of course, talent is real, of course. And my line is, if 10 pianists set out to be great pianists and they put in 10,000 hours, this, they'll end up in 10 different places. And some people will make more progress in 2,000 hours than somebody else will in 10. And none of them will be great pianists because that's not given to many people. So the idea that there's no such thing as talent is another thing. And talent is a dicey thing. It's there, but it's, everybody's talent is kind of different. I mean, when I started in music, I started playing trombone in a beginning band, and I was 12th chair all summer out of 12 trombone players. I couldn't play the next year. My mother said, "You're going back to band," and I couldn't play the second page in the beginning book. So I started over again. And I was first chair the second summer because I had the first summer, but then I went to junior high and I was last chair trombone again. The idea that I had some musical talent would have been absolutely ridiculous. And meanwhile, I wasn't much of a student either. And then in 8th grade, everything just went bluey, and I became a pretty good student. And I became a good junior high trombone player, and everything just changed. Talent is a real thing, but of course it has to be developed. And that has to do with work. You know, if you're very talented, if you have a natural gift for music and you don't go into music, it doesn't show. I don't have any talent for visual art. When I do something, when I try to draw a picture, it's pathetic. Whereas the first time I wrote a piece of music, it was not a good piece, but it was a piece of music that made sense and had a tune and a harmony and so forth. But talent runs in families too. It's not just that you grow up in a musical family, which is true, but it's also true that talent runs in families like the Bach family, who were covering part of Germany for 50 or more years because they just happened. It was the family business, but it was also the family talent. Let's look at the Olympics. People who get into the Olympics are people who train very hard, of course, but they are also people who have physical advantages. Yes. You know, the balance of fast twitch and slow twitch muscles, for example, maybe the length of your legs, maybe you have to have both the physical gift, which is inborn, and do the work. And I think art of any kind is the same. You have to have, if you want to be a great artist, you've got to have a lot of talent, and talent is inborn, but you have to develop it too. And, you know, you can't have one without the other. I think another necessity for genius or great achievement is luck. Finding the right place, the right teachers, falling into the right situation. Genius is, to me, something beyond talent. Genius to me is founded on talent, which is innate, but genius is something that you become. Let's remember something about Mozart. There are at least 2 composers who wrote better, more important and original music in their teens than Mozart did, and that's Schubert and Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn's best piece was possibly written when he was 16, the string octet. Schubert wrote eternal songs when he was in his mid-teens. Mozart wrote good music in his teens, but not as original and lasting. Most of it is Schubert. So what I'm getting at is, yes, Mozart was born with a phenomenal talent, but he got better. The older he got, the better he got. Most of his greatest work was his later ones, and he worked like a demon to grow. He studied and worked and stole from everybody to learn. You know, he was friends with his rivals. He was friends with Salieri at the end, and he and Salieri would sit around and shoot the breeze and talk about opera. And Mozart studied Salieri's opera, and Salieri was a good opera composer
until he killed Mozart.
Salieri actually did say that later, but he was quite crazy at the time, and mostly he said, "No, I think probably romantic fever killed Mozart."
I want to do another of these podcasts with you and talk about your Mozart book, but you know, now you reminded me of that. So, I mean, now we're going to stick with this, but I have a lot of things to ask you about Mozart.
And in the Beethoven book, there are 2 words I never used in the book proper. One is masterpiece and the other is genius, because both overused and in popular culture, you know, people, you know, this genius tomato soup somebody made, that kind of thing. So I just didn't use them. But as I say in the introduction to the book, it's not that I don't believe that genius exists. It's just that it's not simple. The other thing is this, I think my mother didn't want me to go into music because she knew what a crazy thing it was, but she still did. Since that's what I wanted to do, she did everything she could to support it. But singers, for example, think of singers. Your voice takes years to develop, and what it develops into is controlled to a large extent by what you're born with, through the equipment you have in your throat, and that's born. And you don't know how good that equipment is till you've spent years developing it. Of course, you have to develop it. and you have to have training, and you have to have you have to have teaching, but you just don't know where you're going to end up, because if the equipment isn't there, you're not going to be a great singer. And I always felt that singers in conservatories had this look, this very particular look of kind of anxious waiting, because they're waiting to see what their voice is. And you don't know when you get there. And there's something to me very touching and kind of tragic about that. You put in all this work, and the equipment just isn't there. But that isn't radically different than the rest of art, I don't think.
Yeah. To do what we do, you have to love it. You
Yes.
really have to love it. And and this is a very serious thing that I think people don't talk about it. Whenever I do a master class, I see kids that the first thing they want me to help them with is win this competition or get into this school. And to me, this is a very sad thing. And sometimes I see these kids, I understand, because I do a lot of master classes in Latin America. I go to Brazil, I go to Chile, Argentina, and I see kids that are coming from these countries that want to come to New York and study at Juilliard, and they want to make it. They want to really, win this competition, and they want to, because the truth is that if you aspire to a good job in a university, if you aspire to a good life, you have to go through this series of achievements. You have to win a competition, you have to get into a good conservatory, you have to know the right people, then you have to get the right manager. And then once you get the right manager, you have to get to know the right conductor. And so there's like a series of steps that by the time you get to that, to what fulfill your dream, you have lost all love for music. Your soul has been,
The
torn.
greats go through that process, but they don't lose the love.
Right. So what I see these kids doing, a lot of them, are practicing 10 hours a day, and they really want to do it. And I see a lot of psychological damage, physical damage, because I see a lot of kids that, practice, and they don't do exercises, so they damage their tendons, they get tendonitis. There's a psychological pressure. I don't know if you read Lang Lang's biography about the psychological abuse of his father, who threatened
I did.
I mean,
it was horrifying.
Yeah, it's horrifying. And by the way, speaking of minorities in the music business, in the classical music business, I have stories from my Chinese and Korean friends, that are horror stories about the amount of hours that their parents make them practice, and the suffering, and
Let's talk about that for a minute. When I once did, I have no memory of how this happened. I got an assignment from Japanese Newsweek to do an article on Midori, the violinist, when she was 12 years old and about to make her debut with the Boston Symphony of Tanglewood. So I went and interviewed Midori, but I also interviewed Dorothy DeLay, who was one of the legendary violin teachers at Juilliard. And I talked to her for about an hour, and this influenced everything I've written since about Brahms, about Mozart, and about Beethoven. She said, one of the first things she said is, Midori doesn't really know how good she is, because she's in Juilliard Preparatory School, and they're all like that. She may be better, but they're all that kind of. She said it comes from the parents. The kid doesn't at 4 years old mostly say, I want to play the violin. It comes from the parents. And the parents enforce it. And Midori's first teacher was her mother. And she said most of these prodigies crash and burn in their teens because they know how to play the fiddle or the piano, but they don't know how to live. And she had this sense of she was sort of watching Midori all the time, anxiously. Is she going to be one of the ones? Well, Midori didn't crash. She went on to a great career. But the whole thing is so complicated. But you talk about love. I love music. That's why I've devoted my life to it. It has not made me a good living. I didn't make it to the middle class until my 70s, really. And I tell you, I've written some books that I think are pretty good. People think they're good. But I hated every minute of writing the Brahms. I hated every minute. I felt I had screwed myself. They said, here's some money. I said, oh my God, I've never heard of such money. But then the agent takes 15% and the taxes take 20%. And I ended up, basically spending 3 years writing a book on which I made maybe $60,000, which is not a lot of money. And meanwhile, I couldn't write music. And I just set out to be a composer and write music and teach music. That's all I wanted to do.
Well, your Brahms biography was the first biography of yours that I read, and I loved it. I loved the biography.
I hated every minute of it because I said, A, it's making me poor, and B, it's keeping me from composing. But then I thought maybe it'll get me a good teaching job. It didn't. I never had a well-paying teaching job, ever. And, liberal arts academe, I just had the back of the hand from them. And I ended up in conservatory and had to have a job and a half because the conservatory paid so badly. So I had to keep teaching writing at Tufts plus a full-time conservatory job just to get by. And that's when I was writing with Beethoven. The Beethoven was even worse than the Brahms because the company said, the company changed hands 5 times, and the last owner said, oh, this book is years late. We don't have to pay him. So they didn't. So I spent 3 years of that book writing as a slave laborer for no money, deeply in debt. And to say that I hated every minute, but doesn't begin to cut it. It was a suicidal black hole. But I also have a dogged sense of when I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it, and I'll do the best I can. Would the book have been better if that hadn't happened? Yes, it would have. I can tell the difference in the second half of the Beethoven. For one thing, I completely stopped doing any more research at that point. I can tell the difference. It's still a good book because I have talent as a writer, and because in the end I still worked hard at it. And I researched and wrote a 1,000-page book on Beethoven while working a job and a half that barely made me a lower middle class living. And the book was a financial disaster. So what I'm getting at here is not bragging or anything else or giving a hard luck story. The point again is it's very complicated. I remember stories of Matisse drawing. He would be right up on top of a naked model swearing the whole time. And he was saying things like, what a stupid goddamned way to make a living. So, the idea that, yes, I love music, though I say it's been a troubled marriage, a troubled love, because it's done me as much harm as good. But all these things play into what we're talking about. And some people blame music schools for that. And I tell you, at times, I felt guilty teaching music to all these kids who I knew weren't going to get anywhere, especially the undergraduates. They played in a regional orchestra and they decided they really liked playing the fiddle, so they went to school in music and they really didn't know what they were doing. And they're going to spend a whole lot of money and get out and, go to work in a bank somewhere. So the urge to get more minorities and so forth and all this is legitimate, but the process is far, far more complicated and ambiguous than the people recognize who are calling for instant solutions to these problems. There aren't any instant solutions. And music schools make their living teaching people who aren't going to make a living. That's the sad reality too. I remember years ago, I'll tell one more, I'll let you talk for a change.
No, go ahead.
I don't know, 20 or so years ago, there was an article in the New Yorker about pianists, students at Juilliard. And there are, about 200 pianists a year at Juilliard? And of course, these are the cream of the crop from all over the world. And all of them, not all of them, but most of them are hoping to become professional concert pianists. And they're practicing many hours a day. And they're all good. So they asked the teachers at Juilliard, how many of these 200 students this year have, you think, a remote chance of making it as a concert pianist? And the answer was 2 or 3. And none of them did, as it worked out. What did the others do? They taught piano. They played chamber music. They went out into the world. Some of them quit. Some of them did all kinds of things. And if you're to aspire to the very highest levels, that's how hard it is.
And the thing is that I don't know if it's still the case, but I think tuition for Juilliard undergrad programs and maybe even grads was it was not free. Yale University now, the music program, because of
Free.
an endowment, a lot of money that they got, they decided to make it tuition free, which I think is a great thing to do. If you want people to study music, at least or to study classical music, at least make their life easier so that when they finish school, they don't have to spend years trying to pay a debt that will require them to do something else other than music, other than what they love. But Juilliard, with $1 billion in the bank, I mean, I think it was still charging students for tuition. Manhattan School of Music still charges students for tuition, and every time I go and look at the tuition prices for these conservatories and universities for music, I can't believe what I
Well, they do have
see.
they do have scholarships, I'm sure.
No, they give scholarships, but still there are people paying
Well, I
tuition.
know. I know.
The scholarships are covering a small
These
percentage. There are people
people.
that are paying full tuition and spending about $100,000 a year to study music. And then you go in there and then imagine your teacher is telling you, well, Mozart is racist and classical music is racist. And
Well, I don't think they do that in Juilliard. I mean, where they do that is in liberal arts colleges, where that's a whole other issue. How do you get ahead in liberal arts? You don't get ahead in liberal arts. I feel that for a long time now, kowtowing to pop culture there's no way to go wrong in liberal arts schools. If you kowtow to pop culture, that's just the way it is. And there are people who make a living studying hip hop and publishing journals of hip hop. Is that making hip hop music any better? No. And you ask music theorists, are you improving music? They're saying no. Music theory is a discipline in itself for its own sake, and the hell with whether it does anything for music or not. And meanwhile, in academia, if you are expected to do original work, and if it's original, that helps you get ahead and get a job and get tenure, even if your originality is baloney, even if it's absolute horsebucky. I met an aspiring theorist once who just gotten out of Harvard, and his line was, Rameau got it wrong in the 18th century, and Western theory has been screwed up ever since, and he's going to set it right. And this is how you get ahead in academia, but it's not how you make music better. The reason why what you're talking about, I don't think conservatories go into Beethoven is rapist and how Mozart is racist. I think they're there to help music make music better. When I taught theory and history in a conservatory, it was not for its own sake, but to help musicians make music better. And that is a whole different thing. It is presumed, I would hope in conservatories, it's presumed to be something worthwhile and important and great.
Well, but even John, what do you think about this? Even if in the conservatories that you're talking about, you do get this kind of education that is about, improving yourself and loving what you do. But then when you read articles and musicologists and the New York Times and different important music organizations say these things, the organizations you're hoping and aspiring to work for, like the Met or the Philharmonic.
This is a slap in the face to everybody who's dead. I mean, when Susan McClary called Beethoven a musical rapist, that was spitting in the face of every woman who's devoted her life to this art.
Right.
And meanwhile, none of it makes any sense because nobody's subjecting pop music to these kind of criteria or non-Western music. It's just, none of it really makes any sense, but it's how you get ahead in academia. But again, that's why I wanted to teach in a conservatory, because being in a conservatory is about making music. And I hope a lot of people who get out of conservatory and don't make a living in music feel that it's nonetheless been worthwhile, because it's been a discipline. And, and it's been something that was inspiring, and maybe they will stick to music even if they're not making a living in it. I hope so. Here's another thing, the whole business of political correctness. My friend Dan Asia is very conservative, and we've stayed friends for all these years. And he is against political correctness in college because he thinks it's damaging the society. I don't think it is. I'm against it because it doesn't work. Politically correct people calling Beethoven a rapist, and Western culture is innately racist and hegemonic, and so forth and so on. They think they're making the world a better place, but they're not. What they're doing these days in this country is electing Republicans, and that's not making the world a better place. I say this in the article. Running against wokeness is one of the ways Republicans get elected these days, and that's not helping anybody, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and
It'd be
especially
nice. It doesn't.
right, and especially because you really you don't allow the others to have a voice. You're basically entrenched in your beliefs and entrenched in your ideology, and then the other ones do not have a voice. I the great Chesterton that I love quoting, but recently I read something um, he said that beware of people that are always saying that they love democracy and they love the fact that in a democracy everybody has an opinion, but they love for everybody to have an opinion, but they hate the people that think differently to them. And I thought, like, wow, what a wonderful. He said, like, hate somebody else's opinion is fine. Why don't you do that? Why don't you say, I hate your opinion about this and that, but you know what? I love you as a human being. And this is something that you see happening in families, in businesses, in institutions. You don't want.
It wasn't as bad in the past. 25 years ago, it wasn't as bad, I think. It wasn't as bitterly divided into hating the person as well as the opinions. I think in the past, my grandfather was a staunch Southern Baptist deacon in the church, and his attitude toward evolution, for example, was, well, scientists know more than I do. If they say this happened, then I have to take their word for it. He did not look at it ideologically. He looked at it logically. And by the way, I have to say that I am, in a way, I don't consider myself as either left or right, but what I am is an anti-ideologue. I'm against ideology, whether of the right or the left, because to me, ideology is a filter that you put between you and the world, and you see everything through that filter, and it colors everything, and it distorts everything. I try to see what's really there without trying to pretend that I can fully do that. Nobody can, but that's what I try to do without ideology. And if we could start attacking ideology itself, we might get somewhere, I think.
Well, unfortunately,
when you speak out of ideology, you don't speak out of reality a lot of the time.
Unfortunately, the arts, historically speaking, and this is something that Mario Vargas Llosa talks about in some of his books, the arts have been dominated by people that have been ideologically very, very left. I mean, if you think about Bernard Shaw, he was a communist, and Sartre, and Garcia Marquez. I mean, a lot of these important artists have been espousing these ideologies for a long time. And I love another great Chesterton story that he was always in this kind of battle with Bernard Shaw, and he said, I think he's a genius. I love his writing. I think he's one of the greatest artists that we have, but I think his heart is in the wrong place. And I thought that was such a wonderful way of putting the fact that this great artist was a Stalinist and
Well,
a Leninist.
I don't think Shaw was a Stalinist, was he? I don't think he went that far. But you bring up a very interesting question. And let's not forget that art works both ways. I remember seeing who was it, Tiepolo or somebody painting in Venice, where it's a painting of the Doge of Venice of Jesus introducing the Doge of Venice to the Virgin Mary in heaven. And this painting is to say that this painting is selling as a bill of goods is to put it mildly. And in a way, all religious art is selling us an ideology and a bill of goods. And to that, I would say that whatever motivates you as an artist, even if it's cockamamie, if it gets the work out of you, then it is worthwhile for you, maybe in a creative way. But when I say the hell with ideology, I'm really not talking about art now. I'm talking about the regular world, the real world. Whereas the ideology of a lot of modernism was, make it new or make it good or make it bad, but make it new, which is something I've always absolutely rejected. But for some people, that worked pretty well. If that got the best work out of Stockhausen, then that's what it was. That's all right. But
Boulez
the real world doesn't matter.
Didn't Boulez started by marching against Mozart and Debussy and all the composers of the past, and ended up having a career?
I think the French artist thing is to destroy the past.
Right. Very French Revolution. Yes.
Man, and wiped out the great filmmaker who made Children of Paradise. Who was that? And Boulez said Schoenberg is dead, which is something. As soon as Boulez said that, I said the hell with Boulez now and forever.
Well, he said the same about Stravinsky and.
Yeah, I know.
And then he recorded a lot of these pieces and made a great living out of those dead composers he hated. Yeah. So I guess at some point he stopped the revolution and started making a living, right?
Yeah. It's because what he said doesn't make any sense.
But the lack of
it served him well.
Right. The lack of Jan, what upsets me the most about all of this and wokeness or ideologically, possessed individuals is the lack of gratitude. They do not understand that this great music gives lives meaning, give life a reason to live, as Nietzsche would say. Without music, life would be a mistake or a misunderstanding, and that's to a certain degree is true. We don't understand the fact that there would be no concert halls or conservatories or all of these organizations that are an economy in itself without Beethoven, without Mozart, without Monteverdi. None of these would exist.
And we have the spectacle of a great many music departments. Again, I'm mostly talking about liberal arts colleges. Music departments that are full of people who are trained in classical music and who make their living attacking classical music, which is nuts. And, as far as I'm concerned, if you genuinely believe that Mozart is a racist, then you should quit music. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite. Or otherwise, you're just trying to tear down something that is millions and millions of people love. And they love it not because of what it tells them about hegemony. They love it because it moves them and exalts them. I mean, you have to give yourself to art, whatever it is, for that to happen. And I blame artists. I'm pretty hard on artists too about all this stuff.
Yes,
I had a friend who studied with a painter, and his teacher said, "I believe that if you paint in a certain way and people hang it on their wall, it will drive them insane." And that was his goal, to make people crazy. I mean, there's an art that's a pile of dirt in the corner, and that this is pure careerism. Just like journals of hip hop and journals of, this is nothing but careerism. And if you can scrawl a political slogan in crayon on a box and make $1 million doing it, is that not corruption of the highest sense in a way? 40 years ago, I was at the Met, the Modern, I think, and there was a guy whose art project, this particular one, was getting himself shot. So it was a series of photographs. Here's the guy, there's the guy with the gun. The artist is taking off his shirt. The guy is pointing his gun at the artist. And he was supposed to just wing him in the arm, but he actually gave him a fairly serious wound in the arm. So the next to last picture is the artist writhing on the ground, screaming. And the last picture is a check for $100,000. Is this not corruption? And this is visual arts these days. If you can convince rich people to give you scads of money for whatever it is you do, because there is no limits, there are no definitions of art anymore. This is getting into a whole other can of worms. It's not where we started, and I don't think we should go too far.
Well, it is related because the fact is that if you politicize art, if you bring ideology into art, then arts disappear behind those things, and then the love for art disappears, the love for beauty disappears. I mean, this creation is really the representation of the most profound feelings. What we call beauty, what we call great art, is that kind of representation of the most profound a human being has to offer, and that is all. We're lucky to have that.
When I'm not religious, I'm not a Christian, but when I listen to Bach, I'm terrifically moved by. And he is, you can have to say he's selling a product here. He is, but he's selling something more than that, which is his brilliance and his determination to write great music, and his determination, in his case, to humanize the Christian story. Where when we listen to the St. Matthew Passion, we're moved, not because we're religious necessarily, though religious people are moved for that reason too. I'm moved because it's a story about humanity. It's a story about what it means to lose something you love and the process of grief and mourning, and that moves me. What I'm saying is that when art is really good and moving and doing what it should be doing, it transcends its own ideology sometimes. And yet it's the ideology that gave birth to the art. If Bach had come along when he didn't have to make his, he spent as much of his life in a court as he did in church writing secular music, and that stuff is just as great. Well, actually, it isn't just as good. It's pretty great though, but his sacred stuff is his greatest. But that's because it's partly because of his own conviction. It's also partly because he was determined to do fantastic stuff, even though it was not making him rich and famous.
I want to finish our conversation with something you write at the end of your article, and you write, it's the music they care about. Without great notes, words, or painting, the political content of a work may get you applause and money and tenure in a university, but in the long run, it won't matter. The notes and the words justify a piece of music or a poem first of all, and speak to its enduring importance, or they are howling in the wind to little purpose, except sometimes getting fame, money, and tenure in the present. So I suppose those are purposes. High purposes? No.
Let me give you my great example of what you just read, and that's the Eroica, Beethoven's Eroica. As you know, it was originally called Bonaparte. It's a piece about Napoleon. So it is political. And Beethoven, I think, was attaching himself to history and to the most important person in the world in writing this piece. And I believe every note of that piece was written about Napoleon. Who cares? It doesn't matter. When you listen to the Eroica, you're moved by it. You're moved by the notes. And the fact that it's about Napoleon may be an interesting sidelight about it, but it doesn't matter. And if you're not Christian and listen to a great work of Christianity or look at a great painting, the religion doesn't, it inspired it, but it doesn't matter how you feel about it. What it makes you feel is what matters. And that's what I was talking about in that sentence. I read a thing about picking a national youth poet, and they said, I think this is in the article too,
Yes.
they should be ready to comment on the issues of our time. Well, they may or may not be ready to comment on the issues of our time in a presumably progressive way, but they better write good words, or that's not going to ultimately mean anything. If the art isn't there, that's what the art is, writing good notes and good words. And you may be motivated by this or that other in a very valid way, but if you don't write the notes and the words, it won't matter.
It won't matter. Well, thank you, sir. I think we should end it here so that we feel less guilty
Ends up where
about talking for so long. But let's end it here. I have so many more things to talk about, so we can do another one on Mozart or whatever you would like. I'm very grateful for your time and for talking to me, and I hope that um, we can do it often.
well,
Because
I
people
hope.
love listening to what you have to say. I've gotten nothing but
Well, I think they love
great
listening.
comments and reviews about,
Really.
my conversations with you.
Well, I think the thing is, you've got a lot to say too, and I think I haven't been letting you say it enough. So we need to have one where you do most of
No,
the
no,
talk.
people love the fact that you don't let me say much. They
But you have
particularly
all
like
this
that.
acquaintance with philosophy and literature that I think is extremely interesting. What we really need to do is just not film it and go out and have a drink somewhere
We'll do that
and
and film it too. John, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.